to our Global Science Café Czech centers. It's a debate forum where we can sit down and talk about science and other cultural activities with the Czech's best scientists, innovators, and professionals. It's organized by the Czech centers, and the Czech centers are a vital part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. Their main goal is to promote Czech culture and Czech business, Czech science, and cultural activities. And they're part of a network which stretches over 25 countries and 3 continents. So I welcome you all from wherever you are. And today, this evening, we'll be talking about inspiring women in science. And I have with me 3 guests. Welcome all of you. If I start with Marcela, so I have Marcela Linková. And Marcela is a researcher at the Institute of Sociology of the Czech Academy of Sciences, where she directs the Center of Gender and Science. And she's also chair of the ERAC, Standing Working Group on Gender in Research and Innovation. Welcome, Marcela. Thank you for coming.
Thanks.
Next, I have Katka Sam, and she's working at the Institute of Entomology, also at the Czech Academy of Sciences, and part of the Biology Center. Welcome, and thank you for coming, Katka.
Thank you.
And finally, Marie Shabatská, and she is working at the Center of Polar Ecology at the University of South Bohemia. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, inspiring women in science. And Marcela, can I begin with you? Can you tell me a bit about what you do, what your work is, what really is driving you at the moment?
Okay, so perhaps the title of the department suggests that we do research into issues of gender and gender equality in the research profession. So the research that we do focuses on research careers, assessment, research assessment from a gender perspective, mobility, and how it is different between men and women. And so the thing that we're doing now is an EU-funded project that launched in February this year. And it's called UNICEF and focuses on the study of gender-based violence in academia, which is a completely underexplored topic. We are going to do really exciting prevalence study that will cover the entire EU, spanning the academic sector. And hopefully we will be coming with recommendations for what universities and research institutions should be doing to combat gender-based violence and sexual harassment in their working environment.
And you've networked that on a European level at a recent conference, if I'm not mistaken, at the Gender Action Conference that took place in July of this year?
Right, that's a conference that we organized with the Slovenian presidency of the Council of the EU as the final conference of the Gender Action Project, and gender-based violence was one of the main topics, and I think this is something that we will be looking at in the future at the level of grant agencies, research funders, as well as the level of universities and research centers.
And so tell me a bit about the aims of this. So are you able to find a consensus amongst all European states? Was that quite an easy thing to do? Or are you finding there's different opinions, different ideas coming from different areas and regions?
There is definitely difference, and we are seeing it actually in many different aspects. I mean, be it gender equality plans or other policies in place, for example, targets for leadership positions. And it's the same thing with gender-based violence. We actually have countries where it is far more common or even obligatory for universities and research institutes to have policies in place to address sexual harassment and gender-based violence. And then we have countries where nothing is in place. And I think it won't come as a surprise in which category Czech Republic and the former Central and Eastern European post-socialist countries fall. We are the countries that essentially do not have anything to help victims and survivors.
And that's a big shame, but do you feel that looking forward, is it going to change in a positive manner? Do you feel there's support and will from, I don't know, political sectors and administrational sectors that this can be taken seriously and improvements can be made?
I'm really confident right now. I mean, I think that we are at a great juncture right now in the EU in terms of where gender equality can go and what we want to do for diversity. And it appears that both at the policy level as well as the level of research organizations, it's taken seriously, and that countries are aligning around addressing this issue. We will be taking it up with research funders, because the big debate now is what can grant agencies do to assist, because they have such a huge power in the system, because they're distributing so much money. They have effect on research careers. They can set standards. And so maybe we can learn from the US, from National Science Foundation. We can learn from Canada, where the research funders have unbelievable policies in place, where actually if you have history of sexual harassment or gender-based violence, you can't apply for money.
Right. Tell me, Marcelo, tell me a bit about your sort of day-to-day, as it were, lifestyle and life balance. A big aspect of any sort of happy individual is that life-to-work balance and also that daily rhythm. Tell me a bit about how does one do the research in your field, which is such a wide area that expands over the entirety of our human population of the planet.
So I think it will differ also depending on which part of social science you're in and what you focus on. And I think that I'm not your typical researcher, because I really like to focus on applied topics, so do applied social sciences. I don't like doing research just for the sake of research. I always want to do something that will have results that can be used for evidence-based policy, that can be useful to solve societal problems or address issues that we're dealing with in research. So I sort of sit on at least two chairs. Part of me is research, but part of me is also cooperating with colleagues at the EU level, try to devise policies both at the institutional level as well as the level of national authorities, ministries, how to move forward. And so I don't think that this is very typical, but I really enjoy doing that, and I can't really say that recently I have had much of work-life balance. It has been more work than...
Too much work rather than a bit more pleasure. But I should imagine, though, these networking exercises, which seem key to the progress of your thinking and the development of your ideas you have that you can then recommend for implementation, that networking is mainly through conferences like the one you've just organized, or are you sort of daily in contact with colleagues from different European, international countries and states and conversing via, I don't know, Zoom, Skype, emailing? How does it work?
Yeah. So essentially, I think we have now 6 EU projects. It's not just the gender-based violence, but we're also in a project looking at a potential certification scheme for gender equality that the Commission might want to put in place, and others. And so, yes, basically on a daily basis, I spend my days on Zoom with my colleagues discussing either research findings or how to design policies. And I mean, I have always, the international cooperation is what got me where I am, essentially. I don't think that I would manage to do what I have in a Bird Center got if we did not have international cooperation. I mean, we started in 2001, so this year we have 20 years anniversary. And in 2004, I applied and got my first EU-funded project, which was international. And ever since then, this was the path. I don't think you can do anything without international cooperation.
Okay. Well, we're going to come back a bit later on about the path that you also took to get where you are in a bit later. But now I'm going to move on to Katka. And so Katka, you're at the Institute of Entomology at the Academy of Sciences. So I know that's something to do with insects.
Yes.
Can you tell me about what you're doing and what's really driving and pushing you at the moment?
I hate the insect, and I was always interested what eats them, and thus I focus on the predation. And the predators are important to keep the pests under the control, so we don't have too much insect rolling around and eating our crop and eating our forest. And the predators, birds, bats, maybe ants, spiders, are very important for me. And what I do is that I try to manipulate them in the forest systems, and I study what happens if these predators are missing. This is very often happening if you disturb the forest. Somehow the birds do not want to live there anymore. The pests have the chance to grow a lot. So I manipulate the presence of predators in the forest system. I do it in the tropical regions, and I do it also in temperate in Japan, China, Papua New Guinea, Australia, also in Czech. And the other chair I am sitting on is more like behavioral stuff because the birds can smell. This is what we found recently. And this is very interesting because I was always wondering how the birds, how the predators find the insects in the forest. If I can't find them, I don't see anything there. And so I was doing the behavioral stuff and started to study the olfactory of birds, which was not known before. And we are digging into how the birds use smell to navigate themselves to a prey, to insect.
So they have, you've found that birds possibly have a far greater sensitivity of smell than perhaps we do, in terms of whatever chemicals are coming from these
Exactly.
insects.
They smell the things which we do not smell, but they also smell something which was not known before. Everyone believed that the birds just orient themselves visually.
But aren't they also claimed to use magnetic poles to orientate themselves
Yes,
as well?
they do it also, some of them. But the smell seems to be very universal to many of them, many more than ever thought.
I see.
So this is like the predation behavior of predators, which I'm focused on.
So the population of insects, because I know one of the discussions I had with a colleague of mine, I'm a research chemist, but we both enjoy going out into nature for walks, and indeed we were concerned about the fluctuations in annual fluctuations in the Czech Republic or elsewhere in Europe of insects in summer. And it seemed that some summers they would really be a lot, and some summers they'd almost be absent. And there were concerns about those shifts in populations. Unfortunately, another way that many people can directly recognize these changes in populations is when you're driving, say a long distance, and if you're going from, I don't know, Prague to Brno, on some days you might have a window screen with many insects there, and others hardly any. So are these shifts in populations directly linked to the populations of predators, or do us humans and our behaviors have a big impact on their fluctuating populations?
I think this is all related. There are some patterns which are driven by the human. That's the difference between the abundance of your insect on the windscreen in Czech Republic versus in Romania. Because if you go to Romania and drive there in the nice nature, you will have the car covered in the insect. You don't have to wash car in Czech Republic so often. And then there are the natural fluctuations that some weeks there will be many insects, some other week, but this is very natural as the nature develops from spring to summer. And this is where the predators are taking the important place because many insects just hatch and then the populations of the birds to follow because they need to feed the chicks. So this is all fitting together. The problem is if the climate breaks it and then you have the many caterpillars and the birds still sitting on the nests and the caterpillars pupate and the birds die because they have nothing to eat anymore.
Yes.
This is what happened last year because of the cold spring. It was very, very bad for birds.
Yeah, I wanted to get on to that. I mean, I can envisage that the results from your work will tell you and us, through you, a lot perhaps about what's happening globally in terms of our climate change. Are you noticing differences, sharp differences and fluctuations in populations in different parts of the world, whether it be where species of birds are now eating to the populations of insects? Are they changing rapidly, and is that change somehow linked to global climate change?
I unfortunately can't respond to this too much because I didn't work in many of the countries for a long time. The only country where I work a long time is the Papua New Guinea, and there I have the data only for the fluctuations due to the El Nino and the dry and very wet years. And then the severity of the El Nino is very visible and affecting everything, generally the whole system, how it's matching together,
Right.
very significantly.
And when you say affecting, is that is that something that's cyclical that eventually will recover, or is that something that if there's a large El Nino event, then that means a change which is going to be forever?
No, it's. I don't think. So far, it's not forever. It
Right.
just takes few years, and But the thing is that before the El Nino was kind of predictable, and now it's breaking. So it's not predictable, and they are getting closer to each other. So it took some time to recover to the birds and return to the original places. But now the El Nino comes again. So they are not recovering fully, maybe.
Paint a picture for me when you're on the field, when you're going into the field with your work, you're out to Papua New Guinea. Tell me a bit about what you see, what you smell, what's that experience like, and how do you actually do your research work? How do you monitor the number of the populations of different insects and birds?
Okay, I don't see anything, and I'm smelling the rotting wood. That's why I was always wondering why people have these tropical senses and aroma diffusers with the tropical smell, because the tropical forest smells like the rotting wood and rotting stuff, and it's very dark inside. So the birds are somewhere above your heads, maybe 30 meters, 25 meters above you, and you don't see anything. And this is why I got really into this topic, because I wanted to see what they are doing there. So I'm using the mist nets. This is like a nets which I'm hanging to the forest space, so the birds bump into it, they don't see it. And to study the predation and the effect of what they are doing in the forest, I'm building cages around the forest, around the trees, and then I count what insects are surviving in the cages and compare it with what is surviving outside of the cages.
Wow. So that's, I mean, and how many studies do you have to do of a particular area to be sure of your results are statistically viable? You know, what sort of length of?
My first experiment was done on 700 smaller trees, and it was running for a full year. And I see there are some cycles between the wet and the dry season. But then, of course, the saplings, the trees are growing out of the cages, so it's a problem to keep it for a longer time.
Right. And are you on your own in this work, or have you got a team of people? Right.
I have got a team of the people.
And then when you come back to the Czech Republic, you're then going through the enormous amount of data that you've collected.
We are sorting the insect. The important thing is that we are taking the photos of the leaves at the beginning of the experiment, and then we are comparing them with the photos at the end. So we are measuring how much of the leaf was eaten. So we are going through the photos, analyzing the herbivores damage, and then we are going through the recordings of the birds, identifying the diversity and the ID of the birds.
Okay.
Many things to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Katka. Marie, so polar expeditions, you've been through, you're looking at what in the polar regions? What are you interested most of all?
I'm looking at microorganisms, and I'm mostly looking at them on glaciers, so in snow and ice and the sediments that could be found on the glaciers or inside the glaciers.
And how varied and diverse are populations of microbes in those regions of our planet compared to, say, in regions of the planet where Katka's been working in warm tropical areas?
Yeah, the diversity is lower. Obviously, everything in the polar regions, essentially, the diversity is lower. That's why it's kind of a nice lab for us to understand even like the basic interactions between different microorganisms. And on the glacier, everything is like all the life that's there is microbial. Yeah.
But just give me a sort of a relative picture. Is it really sparse? Is it sort of like a desert for microbes, or are we as humans, or were we as humans quite surprised to find quite a lot there?
Yes, I mean, we definitely the prevailing idea was until fairly recently that there's nothing living on the glacier or by accident, and now we know that there's a whole kind of ecosystem that is at home there, and the ecosystem could be quite patchy. There's different, sort of little environments and hotspots of microbial activity on the surface of the glacier, but we don't have anything bigger than very, very small micro animals.
So what do we know about these microbes, and are they in some way useful or important to us?
Well, they have to be adapted to very extreme conditions. So they have to use like basically if they're on the surface of the glacier, there could be quite a lot of sunlight. So they have to have these sunscreen. So they use these protective compounds, and they tend to turn the glacier. Sometimes they have so many of them on these pigments that they turn the glacier like a different color, like pink or brownish. And they so that is something that could be, that could be useful for us. And they obviously relate it to other microbes that we find in the world, even the ones that are right underneath the glacier that have been isolated for a long period of time. So far, we haven't found anything like any kind of like a new life form.
But there are microbes who can survive underneath glaciers, which have been there for thousands or tens of thousands, or if not more years, in the dark and extreme conditions.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, there's like no oxygen, no light, very little liquid water, and probably mostly salty water, and very little nutrients. But there's not that many of them, but they can survive. Yeah.
And so what do you do? Are you looking mainly at their sort of genome and DNA and trying to work out how they can produce these survival mechanisms? And you mentioned, for example, that some sort of natural sort of sunscreen element in there. Are you looking to find out what are the proteins that are enabling this, and how they can be genetically expressed or coded? Or
Yeah, exactly. Most of the work that I actually do is the genetic analysis or the DNA analysis. We are also looking at these little animals, these tardigrades, and we are trying to understand how the ones that are in different glaciers in different parts of the world, how are they related to each other, and how they were able to actually, inhabit the glaciers in the past, how they moved, and also how are they different to the ones that we found like in the tundra near the glacier. So what are the mechanisms that are using, like how come these specific species are able to survive on the glaciers and the other ones not?
and so how do they? Why? How?
We don't know yet.
Don't know yet.
Yeah,
So
like
that's
some
the
of
work
these.
in
Yeah,
process.
that's the work in process.
But then, do you recognize? Are there big differences between these populations between the south and north poles of our planet?
Yes and no. I mean, we do find like the more we look into especially like the bacterial species, we find that they're very unique to the different places. But there are certainly microorganisms that can be found on both of the poles, which is very surprising. Especially Antarctica is very much it's by these oceanic and atmospheric currents. It's quite isolated, and a lot of species, like other species of invertebrates and stuff, are endemic to Antarctica. But in terms on the microbes, there are certain microbes that seems to have been able to inhabit glaciers all over the world.
Wow! So they can migrate, as it were, quite effectively.
Yeah, quite effectively. One of the options is that maybe we're not looking, the resolution that we're looking at now is still not, fine enough that we're not able to really kind of like look.
And you visited both poles. Wow. So tell me, I mean, which is the most beautiful? Are you a northern or a southerner?
Yeah, I mean, the north was the first one I went to. There's people living in the north. It's inhabited, and it's easier to get to. But Antarctica is just quite special. Like, yeah, it's the journey there is an adventure in itself. Like, you either go on a military plane or you go on an icebreaker. So yeah, I guess.
And I presume in both cases you go to their respective summers. You're there when it's light all the time, and
mostly. But I've been in the spring and autumn as well.
And so say something about that. I mean, what's the most shocking alien part of the whole experience?
I've been doing it for a while, so maybe it might be kind of hard for me to say what's alien. But I guess, I mean, you have the changing light conditions. Like in the summer and in the spring, you have the 24-hour sunlight, which is kind of great. Like you don't need much sleep. You can work all the time. You can adjust your schedule to it. Yeah, once it gets dark, it's kind of tricky when you only have a few hours of light.
So, and again, you're working very much in a team environment.
Yeah.
And that's a big team. Are you sort of going there, and are you talking dozens?
No. I mean, sometimes on the station there could be more of us, but we are like different teams helping each other. Like, on the polar stations, you usually like share the polar station with other people, other researchers. They could be from our center, from our university. They could be from abroad, and so on. The teams are usually kind of smaller, around like 4 people. Yeah.
But tell me, so your study of these microbial populations, these ecosystems in our polar. What impact is that having on our understandings of other global systems? I mean, are we able to use this work to also understanding more about how our global climate has changed over the millennia, or is there any other impact it has elsewhere? What are the
Yeah.
fruits from your labor?
Okay. So, like, yeah, some of the aspects that we can talk about is the microbes are, themselves changing the physical properties of the glacier. So they do help because they do darken the surface, and they do grow more when it's warmer and when there's more water and less snow. So they can change and slightly help with the they can have a positive impact on the melting of the glacier, which is actually a negative impact. They do impact the downstream ecosystems, like the either the glacier is melting into the into the tundra, into the stream, and eventually it is end up in the ocean, or it's melting directly into the ocean. And one of the aspects that I'm not necessarily like involved in, but is that these sort of microbes, especially the ones that are living underneath the glaciers in water bodies, are our best analogous of a life that we could find in our solar system, on like the moons of Jupiter and Saturn.
Yes.
Because they have they're very cold, but there's some heat coming from like different physical processes, and there's a body of water, probably saline, and it's covered by kilometers of ice, but there's water coming in plumes through the ice. So so there is some contact with the surface, and wherever there is liquid water on the earth, we found life. So maybe if there's life in some of
So in terms of the chemistry, water is still the main ingredient that's necessary as a prerequisite for life.
You need a source of energy. You need water for sure, because you need to have something for the chemical reactions to be able to like some solute, and then you need some nutrients, some essential nutrients.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I mean, those are three fascinating subjects. We've covered the entire planet at least 3 times, and so you can see it's exciting stuff. So let's go a bit to your personal journeys. Marcella, if we can start with you, because the focus today is about inspiring women in science, and becoming an inspiring woman in science, you must have had an arduous and yet inspiring journey. So perhaps you can tell me a bit about your journey, starting from your very first interest in what you're doing, and through all the way to how you got to where you are now.
So I actually fell in love with languages, literature and languages. That's how I started. So I thought, okay, I will go study linguistics and English because that's what I love, and that's what I did. And then I thought I would be doing literary theory. My master's thesis was on the poetry of Emily Dickinson. And then I thought I would move to the US, which did not work out, and I returned. And while I was in university, I was lucky to be selected for a program that was starting at my department, exchange with Suffolk University in Boston. And I went there, and I just took every gender class I could. And it was a huge eye-opener for me. So I came back, and I knew what I wanted to study. And so when I finished university, I was basically looking around where I could do gender research in the Czech Republic. And the only place that made sense to me was the department of Marie Čermáková at the Institute of Sociology. So I basically scheduled a meeting with her. She agreed to meet me. And at the end of the meeting, she asked me, when can you start? And I was like, now. And so this was, I was extremely lucky to have her in my life. I mean, she was really the change in my life. And then 1 year later, when she got the grant to build a Center for Gender and Science, she was looking around who would like to take that responsibility. And I was like, oh, I would like to do that. It's still working with language, because science is also about language, right? It's not all that different. And so that's where I started. And I really, my research is primarily in qualitative research. So I do a lot of discourse analysis, look how things are constructed through language and what that allows us to say or not say, how people are silenced or not silenced, what language basically does in terms of how we portend ourselves. And that's also important for how we, for example, design science policies, what we put focus on, how people speak about their careers, what imaginaries we use in science. So this then builds, what I study in terms of how we view research careers, what are the metaphors that researchers use to speak about research careers. And this might seem, why study research? But it is really important because research plays a huge role in our societies. It affects basically every facet of our lives. And if we do not have accurate understanding of how research is organized, on what values it is run, it is organized, how researchers think about it, what is the contract that we have between science and society, then it's very, we're losing a lot of potential because things can fall through cracks. I mean, there are huge amounts of money that go into research from public funds and private funds. And we need to make sure that we understand how research is organized, whether the assessment systems that we use are effective, and if in the process we are not losing people that we should not be losing.
Right. Okay, we're going to come to that point in a bit. I like this concept of the contract that society has with scientific research and where we are with that contract and how many people are being left behind. So we're going to come to that in due course. But Katka, tell me a bit about your story. So where did you start your love for insects?
It was not love for the insects at the beginning. I fell for birds, especially for kestrels, kites, all these birds of prey flying on the... And that's how I got to the rescue station in Plzeň and started to work with all kinds of animals. And then I was really not big planner and just drifted me to the ecology, zoology as I went. One person which influenced me was my earlier supervisor, Roman Fuchs, whom I met during the grammar school when I was working on the kestrels, and he told me I am really stubborn and he doesn't want to have anything in common with me at all. So the first thing when I got to the university was to knock on his door and tell him that I want to work with him.
What did he say to that? That's quite.
He said no, but I insisted and I came again. But after 5 years, I realized that we are not the perfect match. It was good for master degree, but for bachelor's. But then I already was drifting somewhere else, and I was really drifting. I was going for my degree to Wageningen, then I was trying to work in Russia, in South America, and by chance I met Wojciech Nowotny and ended up in Papua New Guinea.
By chance, at a conference or, industry?
No, actually one colleague met me at the corridor and he told me, hey, there is a call for the PhD students, you should apply.
Right.
And I was like, no, I'm missing the deadline. So I sent it and they took me anyway. So
it sounds like a number of happy coincidences.
yes.
But also
yeah.
I can detect that there was a real drive there when you're speaking about the first gentleman you're speaking about, where he at the first he said he didn't want anything to do with you, but you kept at it.
Yeah.
So there's a persistence there which has
Yes,
obviously served
I was
you well.
persistent and I have a problem. I can't tell no to anything. So with my life, I was like, okay, there is an expedition. Do you want to join? Yes.
Yes.
And it just happened that do you go to PNG with us? Like, yes.
Okay. So, and Marie,
Yes.
what's your story?
Okay, I'm not from a scientific family. I don't know about anyone who's doing science in any family. So I'm a little bit like Katka. I don't plan much. I do what feels right. So I always loved, animals and loved reading about them, watching them. I quite enjoyed biology and chemistry, but even, math and stuff. in grammar school, and I decided, well, studying biology, chemistry sounds good. I didn't know anything about it. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to be a scientist? And I thought it would be nice to go from Prague. I was from a big city to live to southern Bohemia. I was like, yeah, it sounds cool. I'll be away from parents and so on. So I decided to go to České Budějovice, and there I kind of, just it was a really, really good time in the studies. All of the people that I studied with were from all over the country, and I decided to focus on microorganisms. And the reason was I also had a sort of like a summer job at a microbiology institute that was also in southern Bohemia, in between the grammar school and the university. And because it sounded like this professor that I was working with, he did some research in the polar regions, and that sounded really cool to me. I always loved the polar regions and always wanted to visit them. That was like really my dream. I like winter, I like cold, I like snow. So for my bachelor thesis, I mean, he was, so I was working in the lab, but he gave me this kind of idea, and it was a very technical thing, and he was always away. He wasn't even, at the university. So it was a lot of problem solving and me building things for the experiment and stuff, but I quite enjoy doing that because, it was a specific task. I could focus on it. I could use my creativity. So I quite like that. But I was never in a planner, in the sense that I didn't really wanted to know what is the system in the science, because whenever I heard about it, and then you get your postdoc and stuff like that and so on, it sounded so dull and uninteresting. I wanted to do the science. So for my master thesis, by chance, I got a different professor who was even more working in the polar regions. And by chance at this conference, we happened to get for my first time, to the Arctic, Svalbard. It was a scientific expedition, but it was more of an adventurous expedition, because you are going through these ice caves, and and it was a lot of fun. And so then we got a grant for it. So I did it for my master's, and then when I was finishing my master's, I was, I heard about this American professor who was working in Antarctica a lot, and I was reading all of his papers. He was really famous. He was working there for 20 years on these ice-covered lakes. I was like, oh, that'd be fantastic to work for him. And like Katka says, I saw and basically that he was looking for a PhD student. So I was like, okay, this is it. I'm gonna get this, So I sent him, all the references and everything I could. And then he's like, oh yeah, I get a lot of applicants, so I'm gonna be deciding. And then I went to Svalbard for, I think, my third time, and we don't have any kind of signal or anything there. And we would always go from Tromsø, where we would go by car there, which is in the northern Norway, and we would stay sometime in this women cluster, this kind of cluster, and we would help these nuns to some repairs, and we could keep our car there, and they would take care of some things. And on the way back, we usually flew, but this time we took this yacht, this ship, all the way from Svalbard to Norway, which was like 5 days of no eating, no drinking, nothing. I was really sick, and then, all my stuff got poured all over with these diesel fumes, and we got on Sunday back to the cluster, and I had to ask this head nun if I can use the internet and the washing machine, because it was not allowed to use washing machines on Sundays because I don't have anything to wear and I was really sick. And she allowed me to use the computer in her office, and I found out that I get a PhD there. So I moved to US, and it was quite it was a bit of a shock, a shocker. I found out that it wasn't as great as I thought. And also I was going to Antarctica 2 months after that, and they found out that, oh, but you might have wisdom teeth, so you need to get this removed, and it's going to cost you $1,000 or something, and like that. And it was like, okay, suddenly I have to pay so much money, but in the end, I didn't have to do that. But I went straight for 3 months to Antarctica, and I did that 4 times throughout my PhD. And once I finished my PhD, I applied for several postdocs and some scholarships, and then had this was in this good position that I had to pick between 4 things. Actually, I was picking between 3 things, and then a fourth thing in the UK came up, and I was like, okay, I'm already decided to go to Sweden. I might as well do the interview and so on. And the next day, so I didn't prepare anything because I was like, I don't give a damn. Yeah. And then the next day they called me that they picked me, and I decided for that job. Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. So, ladies, I'm hearing from you a lot of spontaneous decision making, not necessarily from time zero, a hugely ambitious plan that you're going to be professor by a year, whatever. You've gone with the flow. And something which, by the way, I personally can very much empathize with and maps out in many respects how I developed. But nevertheless, all three of you now find yourselves in, relatively speaking, powerful positions in your scientific institutions, leading projects, leading others, colleagues in research goals. And unless I'm mistaken, that can be quite rare, for women. And so let's talk a bit about that jump going from working on scientific projects under the supervision of others to then taking the reins and writing your own proposals, getting into a position where you've got your own team, writing your own papers, finding your own support, organizing conferences. That jump, let's discuss a bit about that. But could we start maybe with Marcela, because you're in a unique position amongst us here, that it's not just your own personal predicament, but you're also, to a large extent, studying reasons why this can be or cannot be rare. So perhaps you could start us off with that jump, going from being a researcher to being a team leader, and yet a woman in science.
Maybe I'm not completely typical, and I was not for a very long time in the position where I would be sort of working in someone's team, because essentially the moment that Dr. Čermáková entrusted me to lead, although I was not a PI, but I effectively led the project, I became project leader and I started writing the grants pretty much immediately. And so I actually had the experience of heading a team, which was sort of really learning by going. And we did not have any support for this sort of development at my institute. I think it's quite common at our institutes that you don't really have so much support in this respect. And so first I started with Czech grants, and then I applied for EU grants in 2006, sorry. I got my first EU research project, which was a huge learning curve because and this shows how important it is to have peer relations. So I met this researcher from Austria who was also doing social science research into gender inequality, and she came to Prague, we met, and when I was putting together this research project, she said she should talk to my supervisor, who was Professor Ulrika Feld, and she's like the top in Europe in science and technology studies. Later, I mean, she is the head, or was the head, of the Science and Technology Studies department at the University of Vienna. And I got her on board, and then a couple other people. So this was extremely exciting. I had Professor Helen Longino, who was one of the founding mothers of gender philosophy and philosophy of science. And so I basically learned a lot on this project. And then when this finished, because I was coordinating the project, I did not have time to do PhD or anything. So when this project ended, I essentially got all the data that I got from my research, from the participant observation, from the interviews, and that's when I got my PhD. But by the time I was, already heading a team and writing other.
So it's like a reversal of the natural sort of, the usual progression to that leadership position.
Yeah.
But is it from your studies in gender equalities and gender in science, in particular gender in science, is it fair to say that your three examples of team leadership as a woman, is that rare? And how rare is that? And if so, what do we do to improve that situation? Mm-hmm. You talked about that social contract that we have with science. Surely, if it is the case that it's rare that for the three of you to be team leaders as a woman in science, surely we're missing out on a lot of potential that we should be nurturing.
That's very much true. And I think that it is slowly improving at the middle management level. So when it comes to, let's say, heads of research teams or departments, we are definitely seeing some progress. The real jump or the real difference comes when we talk about associate professor and especially full professors. And you can see in the Czech Republic especially the move from associate assistant to associate professor and then from associate to full professor takes much longer for women, and it comes much later in the research career than for men, and many don't reach that. So our proportion of women among full professors continues to be one of the lowest in the EU. And the European Commission publishes statistical books every 3 years called Chief Figures. And so in the last one, the proportion of women in Czech institutions and leadership positions was the lowest. And so, of course, there are ways to improve this, but some of those instruments are completely taboo in the Czech Republic. I mean, we have not even started having any discussion about however soft affirmative action measures here. For example, when you look even at advisory bodies like the Governmental Council for Research, Development and Innovation, it's 17 people. There's no reason we don't have parity there. We have surely 8 amazing women who can sit there side by side with 8 amazing men. And yet, even in these bodies, we don't think it's important to have parity or close to parity. We don't have the general recognition that we have abroad, that when we have diverse opinions, that this is good for science.
Okay. Can I ask the two of you for any comments you might have of the role that gender has, from your perspectives, from your career pathways? Do you have any comments about gender in science, whether there's been disadvantages, in your opinion, for being a female, or alternatively advantages? Or do you think that's more or less it's not meant too much, hasn't had too much of an impact?
For me, it doesn't. I didn't see too much of the negative effect. As for me, being a woman, only woman, I can see it when I'm mom, and I can see it on my students. I have got 3 technicians, which have 3 kids, and several PhD students with the kids, and there is a big barrier, like to have the kids during the PhD or during the postdoc, and then just moving forward, unless you have very supportive partner who takes many of the responsibilities, it's generally very impossible to get through.
So you're sort of advocating for a better work-life balance, or a greater empathy for working mothers, especially scientists, if they're playing the role of being a mother and a scientist, a leader of a scientific group indeed, then should there be do you think there's a lack of empathy for that particular role? So should that social contract change to, engender the right conditions that we can prosper better?
Again, for me personally, I have got really great support at my institute, because we have got really nice childcare. I have got the director who generally did like a lot for me to be able to continue. I was home for 6 weeks,
Right.
because I wanted to be home. Otherwise, I was allowed to come to the office immediately.
So you feel supported.
I feel supported, but there is many students who are not.
Right.
And for them, it's very difficult. And also in other fields, like outside of the field ecology, they have it very complicated because they are losing the access to the laboratories. So not all, like there is many institutes and many research centers who do not provide such support as I have got.
Marie, do you feel supported as a woman in science?
Yes, I do feel supported. And maybe it is because in biology we do have more women. We have quite a lot of like women students. So I think the environment tends to be more diverse than maybe in some of the hard technical fields. So it is not like it is not guaranteed, but usually the meetings are sort of a diverse, and there's not always this kind of a environment where women feel like they're the outsiders, or it's like this kind of men world, and the men don't want to adjust to the women's presence. So I do feel supported, and I've always had, even when I work in different countries and different areas of the world. And I think obviously the kind of like biggest challenge is the motherhood, as Katka said.
Yes, but I think Marcelo was in particular alluding to the occupation of not just team leadership roles or middle management, as you said, in these scientific institutions, but right at the top, the directorships, the most powerful positions in these scientific institutions. Do you think that, can you see conceivably a fair pathway to such a role if you were so inclined to have that ambition to take it? Or do you feel as if your journey there would be hindered just by the fact that you were a woman?
Well, I was until 4 days ago the head of like our institute, our little department, but I decided that I don't want to do that, that I don't feel like I'm prepared, or I feel like there's a lot put onto my shoulders that I don't necessarily want to have. But
Yes.
I think I was definitely encouraged, and I was picked by the dean to do that. And I think because I have to, meet with the other heads of the department and so on, and there's more and more women, there's definitely encouragement for that. And I think maybe it's unique in our university that there's not much of a hunger for these kind of like roles and these positions. So people don't really want them that much, these sort of like, functions and leadership positions. So everyone's happy if someone wants to do it.
Okay, so I think, Marcel, that we've got two examples here where they've had a positive and maybe in accordance to statistics, a very fortunate career so far, because certainly what we're hearing from Marie and Katka is fantastic, but if you look at the statistics that we're dealing with on a globe, if not a European level, and certainly a Czech level, a national level, then an international level, that there aren't so many happy, or it's not necessarily the statistical norm. So briefly, very briefly, before we can go to some questions, tell me a bit about the consensus opinion that you are hearing at these conferences you've just had this year, for example. What are the consensus? What are the statistics behind how unlikely is their happy stories, and what the consensus behind what can we do? What positive steps can we make as a society to improve the situation?
I think there are two aspects. One is really work with children, both girls and boys, from very small age, to encourage them to be inquisitive, curious, go for science, and not tell them this is for boys, this is for girls. And you would be amazed, we had a mentoring scheme for secondary school girls from 2005 for about 10 years. You would not believe the biases and the stereotypes that these girls today encounter. This is not for girls. You will not thrive here. You will be there only among boys. You don't have the brain to do this. It's incredible. Why are we telling girls these? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's negative. So one thing is encourage girls to really think out of the box and go to the disciplines where they feel they can thrive. And then the second thing is we really need to change the organization, the institutional culture of research organizations and universities. Because today we have very often unfitting systems of research assessment. We don't have, as we have heard, sometimes conditions for achieving work-life balance. We do not have any measures in place to address sexual harassment and gender-based violence. And this is a very serious, when it happens, it's one of the forces that drives women out.
Right.
And so if we work to achieve institutional changes, which is now the dominant framework to address this, we don't put the blame and onus on women. You have to change, you have to be more assertive, you have to do this, you have to do that. But we look at the culture and how it has been historically gendered.
Right. I noticed when Marcella was talking about sexual harassment or indeed violence at work, that both of you nodding your head. Does that mean that you also had experiences or know of experiences? Is this a real problem from your perspectives and your experiences in scientific institutions?
Well, I think it's a problem everywhere. I don't think it's specific for science. I mean, I've definitely had some experiences, but yeah, I don't know the data, like how much it is different to a typical office and how much it is, like, how much men or even women are using their power over, I don't know, students or someone else or colleagues. And we definitely, like our work is a little bit different when we go to the field. That like you get a more familiar vibe, and so these things can maybe happen a little bit easier than in an office and so on. But yeah, I think that's something that's prevalent everywhere.
Okay. So, I mean, of course, and it's sad to hear that it often ends with the individual then deciding just to leave.
Yes.
And so that presumably means that there's not the organizational capacity to actually fight against it. You can't, they're struggling to find help within in the institution of it all to actually stand up and say, this is wrong, you've got to stop, and they've got to go, not me.
The problem is that research is international, and we expect early career researchers especially to travel, go on postdocs. And so researchers coming from one country to another, in Europe even, will encounter widely divergent conditions for what happens to them if they experience sexual harassment or gender-based violence. In the Czech Republic, we pretty much don't have anything.
Well, on that rather sad point, I think we'll go to a question. We've got a question from Eliška here, who asks you all, what can we do to encourage young girls to pursue a career in science? So you briefly mentioned that the importance of beginning at a young age and not to sort of categorize, okay, young girls, this is for you, don't bother doing this because it's for boys. What else can we do to encourage young girls to pursue careers in science?
Well, there was this effect after the X-Files that Dana Scully, like I think it really made an impact on women going into science. So I think like having sort of scientific heroes in books and fiction, as well as having actual women scientists, like maybe talking to young girls. There's a program called like Dream Gap Project, because there's like up until 8 years old, like the girls don't really they say, oh, I want to be an astronaut or something, they don't think about these things. But then comes the period of time where they get influenced by maybe not necessarily the adults but also the other girls, like you should be doing that, and there's like by 16 you lose them and they go into the more gendered professions. So maybe like focusing on this gap where the girls are lost and no longer interested in this like sort of STEM research because someone tells them that it's going to be really hard or there's going to be only boys. So
is it, I mean, again, this is interesting from a male perspective. So I suppose I'm used to often going into, let's say, typical scientific scenarios. You're going into a room, you're presenting a viva or something, or you're presenting a paper at a conference. Often it will be 80% men. And so I suppose, is it an intimidating thing? If you're a woman going into these situations, even if it be sort of subliminal, if it not be necessarily a conscious thought, is there a degree of, is it intimidating? Is that why it's important as well to find female role models? Because I remember you mentioned one of your role models was one of a male.
Yes, both of them were males, actually. I don't have any female model, but that's why I think it's really important to have one. And I hope I try to be, because... well,
indeed you are, that's why...
yeah, but also like the simple things that, you can have a man who invest all their time into the science, and you can't, as a woman with the kids, I can't really compete with them. But I try to be an example of a woman who has the weekends. I don't work too much outside. Of course, sometimes I have to catch up, but I try to show that there is a possibility for a woman to be in the science and have normal life outside of the work.
I think it's important for all young people to realize as well that science, although it can be highly competitive, you can find your little patch of unknown, where knowledge is deficient, where you can work and you can explore and you can discover and you can publish and you can create. And that will be almost your little niche of science.
Yes, exactly.
And so I think as many, I hope that people who are not necessarily competitive by nature understand that you don't have to be ultra competitive to succeed in science.
What our research shows is that you have to have extreme levels of perseverance and ability to withstand failure, because the experiments fail. I mean, yes. I mean, especially in the natural sciences, these appear to me to be the most important two qualities.
So perseverance and failure, but that's and the ability to overcome failure, but that's not unique, I presume, to men. So that's another thing to. Okay. Right. Well, in that case, I think we're going to bring, unfortunately, this debate to a close because our time's running out. So all that remains for me to do is to thank our guests, Marcela, Katka, and Marie. I wish you all the luck in the world and all the enjoyment in the world in your research aims and your careers going forward and your family life and your children and everything. And I hope you do continue to be these great role models for young women and young men alike. And I thank all of you watching for your time and kind listening of our discussion. I hope it's been of interest to you all. Do follow Czech Centres further on and to our future Global Science Cafes. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.